It is Tuesday. That's right, not Monday, but it is 4 o'clock. We've maintained that part of the program schedule. It is 4 o'clock. It's not Monday, it's Tuesday. And of course, we're here to talk about football. At the top of the list, of course, is the Canadian Football League. With me, as usual, is David Morisuti. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frank. Hope you're doing well.
Oh, well, just awesome. Just nightmares and stupid, silly stuff like that. Other than that, everything's peachy keen.
Well, nightmares are usually not good.
Well, it's part of something I've battled since my days in construction. My supervisor fell to his death. I was first on scene, caused a lot of me being unable to work. So many triggers, and anybody who suffers from PTSD knows that the nightmares are really what makes PTSD so hard. They don't all go away. I've yet to be able to say that they've gone away permanently. They've never gone away permanently, and they're an issue to deal with. One that's, look, I'm not looking for sympathy here. I'm just saying it is from time to time a tough situation. And people have it tougher than me, so I'm not going to sit here and sound like I'm whining. It's not necessary. I don't have to whine, and I don't have to complain too much about my life because it isn't that bad. But unfortunately, sometimes what happens is things like this get in the way of your life, and that's just what happens. Let's get on to the subject matter, and of course, that subject matter is the Canadian Football League. And as everyone knows who's tuned in with us or followed anything to do with the Canadian Football League, know that we cover the Toronto Argonauts. And we know that the schedule this year, we haven't really talked about the schedule, David. They really are moving away from the weekend, the Saturday on the weekend.
When they did the schedule reveal, what I appreciate from the CFL when it comes to the schedule, they did a better job of explaining why they did the way they did it, right? Some of the finer points. I'm just trying to find that email that the CFL has sent me about the schedule, because it wasn't just that they revealed the schedule. It was how the schedule was done up, and the one thing many people had noticed was. Let me see if I can find it. It was meant to, I think, curb some of the issues that the people had with the way that everything was done, like last year, right? A lot of those Thursday night games, that was beginning to take a toll on attendance around, not just around the league, right? So. Here's like, if I bring up the three things that they said, 3 points: striking a balance. No clubs have a 4-day turnaround. Remember how many players said 4 days between games? That was no bueno.
And McLeod Bethel Thompson was one of the loudest.
Yeah. No club has more than 3 instances of playing an opponent that's coming off a bye week, right? 23 games will kick off at 4 p.m. local or earlier, a 44% increase compared to 2024. Now, this is the most important part: providing families and kids more opportunities to come together at the stadium to cheer on their favorite teams. That was a big issue, especially in Toronto. We talked about getting to the stadium, getting home. It's okay. 7 o'clock's not so bad because you're. The game's done at what, 10:30. It's not. You imagine you have a child, you have a couple of kids, you're not getting home till 11:30 on a Thursday night. That's tough, right? It's at Fridays when you have a lot going on in the city. It's really tough. I think that was probably the biggest thing when it came to the schedule. Getting more of those afternoon starts was crucial, because they played a lot to the TV audience to have the night games, but it didn't play again. I think they overcompensated how much they needed a TV audience. Yeah.
Absolutely. For us, because we did go to a few games, we go to all the games, and there were a few games that I think more last year than any time I could remember, David. I think last year was probably, on the whole, one of the worst seasons in as far as getting to the park and leaving the park is concerned. And that's not something that I'm saying, boo-hoo. It really was bad. And when I say bad, I'll highlight it with one very simple statement, one tiny little experience that lasted over an hour. That was moving the car 12 feet out of the parking lot. We sat there for over an hour waiting to get out of the parking lot.
The lot. Just
the lot.
And don't get me started on when you have to do the C&E.
Well, that's buyer beware as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to let them off the hook on that one.
I think the C&E game, don't correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, did we not transit in for that game? Or did we drive?
Yeah, now that's another complaint that now you reminded me of. But that is not with the Canadian Football League, not with the Toronto Argonauts, but it is with the TT. Not the
Go
TT,
Train.
Go Train. We had to go to 3 different Go stations to try and park the cars that we had. I met him from Sega. He drove from Etobicoke and just didn't want to drive into the city. It was as anyone can imagine, when the exhibition is underway, there's going to be problems getting close enough to the stadium to walk. And if you're lucky enough to find a place close enough, not far away, or even, as it turns out, far away, you might be able to make it in time to the game. And you had one of those experiences where you parked. We got to.
I was late for the game. I didn't get to. Frank, I dropped you off.
That's right.
Game hadn't started yet. I got into the stadium in my seat at the end of the first quarter,
and I was there 45 minutes before the kickoff.
It was the biggest. I can't even use the word I want to use ever. So
it was franked up, definitely.
I'll tell you this. So the Argos have 6 home games on Saturdays and 3 on Fridays. 5 of the 6 Saturday games will be afternoon games.
Yes,
that is massive. Massive. And look, I understand too. You're going up against the Blue Jays in some cases. I'm sure they probably worked their way around it a little bit. The C&E game, this is a big one. C&E game will be on August 23rd at 3:00. It's usually a night game, not this. So most people are just like, well, I don't have time to get to the game ahead of time. You go to the C&E, and by the time the game is done, the C&E is almost over. The night's almost over. So I think I think that it's going to make a big difference for a lot of teams to get that balance that they were looking for in the schedule that they didn't have before.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing, and they have to listen to the players as far as their health is concerned. They've done things like have the buys to help with players getting a chance to decompress, if you will. And now this is the final thing that I think everybody can agree. I don't think it's a tough one to say, no, don't have 4 days between games. Not a good idea.
No, it's it gets ridiculous when you consider you got to make it easier for the experience. So I do think that this needs to be a situation where the league has looked at this, and there's still things the league needs to work on. Definitely. True. This was an easy one, in my opinion, for them.
Yes. As much as a slam dunk as it could be.
There's never going to be 100% in agreement. No one's going to ever be 100% in agreement with what the schedule's like, but I think that this is as close as you're going to get.
Yeah, well, that is one thing that I think is fine that they did. The schedule is out. You can, it came out a little later than usual, or as usual has become. It used to come out at this time every year. After a few years ago, it changed. Actually, with Randy Ambrosi, it changed. It came out a little earlier, giving everybody, an opportunity to plan and to consider freeing up their schedule so they could get to the games. That's the important thing. So a little later, so that challenge now has returned a little bit, but it'll be gone soon enough. Next year, I think hopefully the schedule will come up a little sooner. People like it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's included in Christmas presents, that kind of thing, that over the years I've heard from fans, some of the advantages of bringing it early before the new year. So the schedule, we'll see how the players react to it, what it looks like. I guess the other thing to consider is, once the schedule's decided, and now the free agency thing, we've had an opportunity to see the teams start to get fleshed out. And I don't think things have changed since the very beginning of free agency. I think the Argos are still the team that on paper, they look to be the most impacted negatively in losing players. And on the other hand, because they've lost so many players, I think it's only fair to say that they've tried to keep up with the loss of players. Fair?
I'd say so. Yeah. But and I also think people need to understand, when you make any changes to the schedule too, it's not just about the fans, it's about the players too.
Absolutely.
Players have long desired for more balance in the schedule, where they're not doing these short turnarounds that put them in a tough position physically to be able to recover after a game as well. I think there's a lot of factors that come into play with this, but yeah, I mean, the calendar itself, like, in my opinion, should we be waiting this long for free agency? Right? Like, it seems like most teams are getting their stuff done. I understand maybe front offices need a bit of a break, and GMs and coaches want to be able to go out and get away, but it's not always possible with everything, right? It's a tough thing that the CFL has to deal with a work-life balance, that's for sure.
And if you're the Toronto Argonauts, your defensive line, that they're literally going to have a brand new defensive line. Will it be a good one? Mm-hmm. Only time will tell, because they're not bringing in a lot of players. The majority of new linemen are literally new linemen. Experience is not something that they're leaning on as they did in previous years.
No, exactly. I do think that there's a lot of there's a lot of fundamental issues that they've been kind of slowly addressing. So I hopefully things can get a little better. It's gonna take time, but yeah, I think nothing's ever going to be perfect. I think the CFL has been more mindful of it. I think the fact that the CFLPA has been more involved in this stuff, I think, has lent to help the league a bit more. But again, you're never going to be perfect on these. I think the players understand that it's a business, and businesses are run a certain way. But I think the CFL has also realized that, the business hasn't exactly been it hasn't been at its best. So adapting and making changes to help it is certainly important.
Yeah, real quick, Deshaun Amos, Fraser Sopik, Tunde Adeleke.
Oh, this defense! People are going to look at this Argos defense next year and go, "Who?"
Jared Brinkman, Kerfella Exume, are all players that are gone. Other than Kerfella Exume, the rest of them are stars, exactly, all stars. In fact, they they didn't keep a lot of players that they could have, but Kadeem Carey stayed with the club.
Yeah.
New,
DeMonte Coxey stay with the team.
yeah, Hergy Mayala they brought in, which is
Yep. He got hurt. He was dealing with injury, so hopefully he's back.
All their quarterbacks came back. And for me, another interesting one is Ciante Evans. He's an interesting pickup.
Oh, that was a shrewd move. I think when you look at, I'm just pulling up because I actually put together a bit of a CFL tracker of all the signings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like you look at this Argos, who they added. We talked about how a lot of their different positions got kind of depleted. They brought in, and I probably have to update this a little bit more, but they brought in so many defensive linemen.
They sure did.
They're going to try their best to kind of, what's the best way to put it? Retool it on the fly.
Absolutely.
We obviously still don't know I know it's been rumored that Jason Shivers is going to be taken over as the defensive coordinator, but that hasn't been announced yet. At least I haven't seen anything. But yeah, I mean, look, Ciante Evans, that's a pretty good replacement for, like, I don't know if he's going to play the Royce Metier or Deshaun Amos position, because I don't know I think he's more of a corner than he is a halfback.
And then there's the constant plan that the Argos do from training camp, and it creates a little bit of an issue for running up to speed, and that is the way they like to interchange all their defensive backfield, how they all move around. And I don't know how easy that's going to be this year.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important, right? That's why, the Argos have really made training camp such a vital part to the evaluation. I mean, it's every team's evaluation process is kind of like that, but I always feel like the Argos have always found guys that they said, okay, maybe he's close, but he's not there yet, and they give them the time to get there. They don't. Some players, maybe that he should be released because he's not fitting. Sometimes you got to give these guys time to adjust. There's going to be a lot of guys coming in from the States too. I think that also you have to keep in mind as well too.
Absolutely. Just to give you the idea of contrast, Edmonton didn't keep that many players that they originally had, but they brought in and I like saying these names because Edmonton's really. I'm hoping that they don't have the problem of having. There's always leaders, and then there's the guys that stand back a little bit and let the leaders lead. They have so many great players that could lead a team. I'm just wondering whether they're going to have a logjam at the leadership level. So I'll read the names real quick. Emmanuel Rugamba, Keon Julian Grant, Kobe Williams, Gregor McKellar, Royce Metchie, Tyson Middlemost, Terrell Ford, Jake Serezna, Robbie Smith, Jared Brinkman, David Beard, Sam Akitapong, and Stephen Dunbar Jr. Goodness gracious. None of those players played for Edmonton last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty good group of players. And I'm just wondering how easy it's going to be for them to basically develop a pecking order as far as leadership is concerned. It's going to be.
Well, that's going to be on the coaching staff to have to figure that part out. But I don't think there'll be too much. I wouldn't be overly concerned if I was Edmonton. Like, it's never bad to have too many veterans, but there are veterans who I think the front office would have already determined who they believe should be the guy to lead the charge in that regard.
Yeah, but a lot of times, David, when people, like we saw, not to change sports, but we saw John Cooper coaching a bunch of players that he only knew from being opponents, right? And what we hear from coaches when they coach somebody they haven't coached, they've only played, coached against them. They learn a lot about those players, and that's what I'm getting at, is that there's a lot for that right, face to face understanding, action on execution that you're putting forward, how these players react. It's going to be interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, it's amazing how many new players Edmonton have that are quality. I'm interested to see how this plays out.
Oh, it's gonna be fascinating when you really consider how much how much the teams really do need their veterans to step up. I mean, look, that's always been a big thing when it comes to the how would I say this? When it comes to
building the dynamic on a team.
Building the dynamics. That's what they always. You can get all the talented players, but now we're realizing how much chemistry is important. Will these guys be able to mesh together too? I don't think that, again, I think people understand that that's something that you can't overlook, in my opinion, right? And I do think that there's more of an understanding of that now than maybe we've seen in the past. I've seen the Argos go out and get really prominent free agents. Frank,
yes, go ahead, go there. I heard you start to say his name, Charlton Heston.
Do you remember when Charleston Hughes?
Charleston Hughes is such Charleston Heston.
Do you remember when Charleston Hughes was a Toronto Argonaut?
Yes, and he regrets the move.
He recently came out and he said, I think it was this week, he regretted the move because he saw the opportunity, but it wasn't exactly to what I benefited him. Right. And so I do think, I really do think that you have to really understand what your, it's not just about getting the most money. And I don't think that really was it.
It's the environment. It's
the environment, the opportunities. Can you mesh with the culture too? There's a lot of that are you in your, obviously health plays a factor too. Like Jake Serez, I'll bring this up. Jake Serez was reported he was offered almost $30,000 more to stay in Toronto, and he took $30,000 less to go to Edmonton. That to me says while Serezna played really well in Toronto, he wanted to follow the defensive line coach to Edmonton. He liked what Edmonton was doing. It's just the nature of the way things go. And if you're Toronto, you're obviously disappointed on that. But that's kind of just that's just kind of where
they gave up a good player to get him.
They did, but you have to give up a player to get a player, unfortunately.
But now that player's been given up, and then that player's not coming back. Serezna's gone to Edmonton, so they have both players in the trade now.
Yeah. So, Toronto got a championship out of it, so I don't think Toronto's complaining too much about how that went.
So complaining is not what Toronto can do. They've won 2 Grey Cups in the last 3 years. Will they be able to make it 3 and 4 years? Will they be able to make a noise about being a dynasty? That's all up in the air right now. And I do know one thing about the Argonauts and being close to them, right? I've not been sure they were able to play as well as they did the last 3 years. They've always, in my opinion, in my mind, they've overperformed.
No, I agree. I think
if one doesn't look at the East Final loss, that that season, the East Final loss is a real damper on what was one of the greatest seasons of any team. In fact, it was the greatest season in Canadian Football League history. That they won a Grey Cup one year, they did that the next, and then they won a Grey Cup again. So it's been a team that's been dominant, and they've done it out of whole cloth a lot of times. I mean, they've done a great job of, changing on the fly, if you will.
Well, again, but that's where you get a really good front office is able to kind of foresee it. I don't think Toronto could have foreseen exactly how much was going to happen in terms of how many guys were going to leave, because they believe they could have gone Ceresna. They offered him a good amount of money to stay. It wasn't about money. This was a clear situation where it wasn't about money. It was about the fit and opportunity. And you know what? You take a little less to go to Edmonton. You don't need to make as much to go to Edmonton either, because the living situation's a lot cheaper there too. I mean, people need to understand it as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, they do have a lot of work to do, and the good news is, and as we're as we're seeing, the good news is that their their season is one following a Grey Cup. So regardless, and I've seen this over the years, regardless, as long as they don't totally screw up the season, Argo fans are pretty forgiving. They know this team historically has had really bad years after Grey Cups. Now, this generation of Argos, this management team with Pinball Clemens and their head coach, Dinwiddie, they haven't done that. They haven't fallen apart after a Grey Cup. We haven't seen that. So, and if they have another year where, they don't make it to the Grey Cup, the fans aren't going to lose it. I don't think so. And I think the one thing that the Argos have developed with their fan base is a modicum of grace that they earn by virtue of how their team plays.
Well, that's it. I know a lot of fans are probably upset of what's going on. But hey, like you got to understand that the ride doesn't last forever in a lot of ways, but also Winnipeg didn't freak out when they lost a couple players.
No.
Right? Obviously, a lot of players also, they convinced a lot of them to stay. But you got to learn to adapt. You can't. I always find that teams that try to hold on too long tend to come out on the wrong end. I look at Calgary, right? Maybe they were wrong to try to keep that window open. Yeah, making the playoffs is great, but maybe try to look past that as well and thinking, what's going to happen when you're not able to make the playoffs, right? Are you setting yourself up for what's to come next, if that makes sense?
Yes. Well, they have a long history of basically ensuring that they're competitive. They have never been in a position of not being competitive with Dinwiddie and the clipboard in his hands.
That's true. So
I don't see it being a problem today or in any time in the near future. I think they've earned the right to basically do the best they can and know that their fans will appreciate what they do. That's the important thing.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the way she goes, right? In a lot of ways. So I think that at some point you need to be ready for any look, teams. Look at sorry, I'm thinking of Hamilton. We always talk about they always go after the Argo players. Well, maybe there's a reason why they do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of need to understand that there's there is a kind of a situation where you have to think about competition. How do you get better? Well, if you can go and grab a guy from another team and pay him a little more, you might as well, right? So Yeah, we'll have to kind of you gotta have to live with it, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, and they'll have a fair year. They'll do fine. And again, as I said, that's all relative to having won a championship. Now, we've talked about the teams from our perspective, at least I'll say from my perspective, that needed to make a lot of change because of reaction to losing free agents, the Toronto Argonauts. And then the other team on the opposite end of the spectrum, the Edmonton Eskimos, that basically said, "No, we're rebuilding. We're in full rebuild mode. We're going to go out and get the best players we can find and basically turn this thing around and be a competitor this season, vying for a Grey Cup." And if on paper, I think they've done that. What would be the next team that you think of interest to talk about? It'd be very easy. It's easy for me to think of Calgary, because Calgary's the team that not only was in a position where they might have to rehire a lot of players and find new players. But the real thing is they've got a whole new coaching staff. I think this is the most influx version of the Calgary Stampeders their fans are going to see this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when you look at Edmonton specifically, like you got a new owner, you have a fan base that's frustrated. You can't. It's hard to sell the message of patience when they've been pretty patient. Like they haven't, right? Like remember when, like, again, maybe it's easier when a new owner comes in and says, "Look, you want to do things the right way, give us the time." But I look at what Toronto did, right? They said, "Well, we don't want to make this a 1-year thing," and look how it's turned out for that team. Playoffs every year. 3 division titles since the new regime has come in, if I'm not wrong. I think that's a pretty good return on that patience, in my opinion. But I mean, look, I think when you look at how everything has come about, you kind of need to you need to be understanding of how do you want this to be a quick fix or do you want this to be a long-term sustainable thing? Because the quick fix is easy. We've seen it in the CFL. It's the teams, though, that don't prepare for life after the quick fix. Those are the ones that get in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those are the ones that are going to get in trouble. And you know, right now we know that Calgary is a team that if they're not rebuilding with their team, they're definitely rebuilding with their coaching staff, which basically makes them a candidate, with Edmonton making the improvements they have, and with Ottawa being the kind of team that they can be, that we've seen, you know, little flashes of brilliance that they've had over the past couple of years. It basically makes Calgary the candidate to be the bottom feeder in the Canadian Football League. That's why I mentioned them. And I don't see them being able to do anything other than that, just because they're starting totally from scratch with the coaching staff. They've totally revamped their quarterback room. It's totally different. Stevens is gone.
Yeah.
Schultz is gone.
Yeah, I mean, they also got the quarterback from PJ Walker, I believe, is now in Calgary too. So, you know, there's like they've it's a total rethink of the position too in a lot of ways, because you know, this is a team that hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for Calgary. The current, so you know, if you say, these guys are gone, this is gone, well, you know, maybe it was kind of worth it in a way.
And there have been some questions as to whether, whether their coach was going to still be their coach or their GM was still going to be their GM. And he's doubled down. He's got, not only did he not, drop one of his positions, which you and I both agree is not a very good, it's a little too difficult to be both coach and GM in the Canadian Football League. We have not seen it work in a while. I don't see it working in the near future or in the distant future. So this is he really has doubled down that he's the guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, with Calgary especially, Dickinson is, in my opinion, he's on the clock, right? Because, and I know that he's been there forever, but you look at this as it's been very tough for Calgary the last couple of years, and I haven't really seen a lot of accountability on. Actually, maybe I shouldn't say that because I haven't heard a lot from Dickinson, but it just kind of feels like there hasn't been a lot of understanding that things needed to change. They made the sweeping changes to the coaching staff. They did get a new quarterback, so maybe there's a little bit of that. I also just think that there's got to be a little more than just a couple of tweaks, right? So we'll see how we'll kind of see how that works.
Absolutely, and I suspect it's going to be really interesting. The team that really needs to bounce back for their fans and their ownership more than any other team that I think is the team that I think I'm going to have my closest eye on, David, is the BC Lions.
Mm-hmm.
And strictly, I don't think there's a team that had such a great upside to look forward to, and the upside was so different than what actually happened in the season that I would have to call that team, and it probably the most disappointing season of any team. I mean, losing, if you're Winnipeg and you lost in the Grey Cup, very disappointing. But I'm not talking about the Grey Cup. I'm talking about the regular season. The playoffs are a bonus in my mind. If one just looks at the meat and potatoes of a season, which the season is, I think BC was the team that disappointed their fan base, their ownership, and their coaching staff and their fans more than any other team, based on what a lot of us thought they were going to be able to try and do, and that is win at home.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, most teams that went into Edmonton, they expected to come away with a win. That shouldn't happen in any league. You should be able to win your home games. The Toronto Argonauts have been like 14-3 in their last 17 games at home or something like that. They took it over the last 2 years. That was a tough place for a team to come out with a win. Now, did Toronto dominate all those games? No, but there were certain advantages that they had to playing in Toronto that now they got better at playing on the road, obviously, when you see how the record has been the last couple of years. But like there's something to be said that Calgary used to be one of the toughest places to play. Hamilton. Toronto couldn't win Hamilton to save their life for the longest time. There's advantages to playing home, but it's also, if you want to sell tickets, you got to say, hey, good chance we're going to come away with a win because we're a good home team. And I think that if you're a CFL team, that's got to be that's something that should be an important part of your game plan. Let's just say,
absolutely, absolutely. The team that has the most ground that they can cover. I'm not doing, as you can tell, I'm not doing power rankings here. I'm more or less at this point in the season with free agency gone. The team that's most the opposite of BC that has because of what happened last year, because of the way the year played out, especially at the end. I think Hamilton going in, if I were the fans in Hamilton, or if I was the coaching staff, if I was management, the new GM, bringing in a lot of winning experience, Hamilton's the team that I think most fans should be that would be happy to see this season start. I think more than any team, the Hamilton Tiger Cats look to be on the verge of having a great season, in my opinion. When one looks at the way it's been for them the past couple of years, they have the best upside, in my opinion. Every other team has had a modicum, at least, of upside, so that cuts into how much upside, comparably speaking, from last year to this year. Hamilton's the one that has, I think they're on the precipice of making the biggest improvement. And for them, that biggest improvement will only involve them making the playoffs, David. That's the way I see it. And I see that not being a slam dunk, but I don't see it I see it a 50-50 shot. They could make the playoffs next year. They're on a knife's edge in there.
I think Hamilton's got a really good chance to go and make the playoffs. I think playoffs is minimum for them. Can they beat out Toronto? Now, there's a lot of things changing in the division. Toronto's defense, right? How much turnover there is there. Montreal is going with a new quarterback this year. Well, newer. They're going with a new starter. Okay, let's just say. There's also, is Ottawa going to be able to, do what they did last year, right? They remember Ottawa had to fight and fight for their playoff spot. Just because Hamilton was, I think Hamilton. We already, Frank, you and I both know what Ottawa needs to, Hamilton needs to do to make that push, right? You need a better start. You cannot have a bad start if you are Ottawa. Sorry, if you're Ottawa or Hamilton. In my opinion, those are two teams. I don't know if they would be able to overcome a bad start. I look at what it did, Ottawa, what their good start did for them, and what it didn't do, what it did to Hamilton. Because Ottawa, they cratered near the end. It's so tough.
Yeah, you made it. You said it perfectly there. Hamilton needs to get a quick start. Ottawa proved they could do that. But Ottawa, having done that, needs to be more consistent throughout the season. You've defined how both of them can improve this season by doing those two things.
Right. And so I really do think that I also look at, Montreal, that's a team where coaching has been very good for them. They don't have a lot of. They have good players. Frank, do you think they have a lot of star talent on Montreal? They got good players. I just don't know if they have the upper echelon players. Right? They haven't had the best quarterback in the league. I just look at the Pistons. Maybe on defense they've had some good players, but I just haven't seen it. In my opinion, I haven't seen it enough to say, yeah, this team is going to be the division. Like, I don't see them as being the favorites for the division. I think it's going to be more open for the East again. And I also I can't see Hamilton's going to be better. Or are they going to be division favorites? Maybe if their defensive coordinator can work some magic, they got better. Amos is a big pickup for them. I do think that. But that defense was bad. Like that's got to be the biggest turnaround for Hamilton. Even like on offense, isn't enough.
I think what you're saying, and I'm going to help you along because I agree with you that if put two things together. What you said there and a quick start will put them in the equation, at least at the beginning of the year, to be, if they have a quick start, they'll be in the conversation, who's first or who gets a home game in the playoffs, right? I mean, either of those things would be an immense improvement for Hamilton. Either of those things, competing for first or getting a home playoff game.
Mm-hmm.
And they could put themselves in a position there if the Argos if what they built doesn't work, and they're doing a lot of building, and they're doing a lot of stuff they've been very successful at in a smaller fashion. It's going to be a little more of a rebuild for them this year. If the Argos, to say the exact same thing for the Argos, they need to not have a slow start. I'll put it that way. That's what they need to worry about, because if they have a slow start and Hamilton has a quick start, and so does Ottawa, and we know Montreal's going to be in the hunt for first, it's going to be Labor Day got to win the rest of the way. Have a really good winning record from Labor Day on. That could be where the Argos are, and not to say they can't, because they can.
Well, they were the hottest team one of the hottest teams after Labor Day,
right?
Coinciding obviously with them getting their quarterback back.
Absolutely, and they're leaning heavily on their quarterback room, very heavily.
You have to. I think you've kind of got no choice but to lean on your quarterback room, because that's kind of always been, the strength of Toronto. Actually, I wouldn't even say it's like the last couple of years. They haven't allowed the quarterback issues to really be their downfall.
And that's because the defense has not allowed them to get in a position to lose. As far as I'm concerned, the offense of the Argonauts is the opposite of what may happen in Hamilton. In Hamilton, the quarterback could take that team further than they've been. What the Argos quarterbacks have had to do, by virtue of injuries, rookies, that kind of thing, they've had to not lose games. Because as long as they didn't lose a game, they had a defense that basically scored defensive touchdowns. A lot of games were won by the defense, not just playing really good defense and zeroing out the opposition, but outscoring the opposition as well. So, and that they're not going to have that luxury this year, I don't think. I hope I'm wrong for Argonaut fans. But that may not be a case this year, and that's why the offense this year is probably going to be leaned on more than it ever has, in the Dinwiddie era.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean, Hamilton has just needed a bit of stability. They went through a lot of changes. There's been a lot of adjustments with that group. Right? I think they just needed they need to settle down a bit. In my opinion, they do need to settle down a little bit and just kind of build on what they have, rather than people talk about, is this the end of Levi Mitchell? Are they going to do that? Like, maybe try to, I know for the longest time on Orlando Steinauer, they didn't make the changes between Dane Evans, Jeremiah Mazzoli. That was what they stuck with it, but it was successful, right? Now there's turnover, and people are like, is it the right direction? Do we need to change direction? Let it work out. Give it a chance. I understand Hamilton is craving that championship.
They are.
They are craving a championship, but you got to give it time to. It doesn't happen overnight, and if you're constantly making all these changes, it doesn't allow it sets you back more than it. I understand they try to get a reset, but the reset also means you got to give it a chance to jumpstart and improve.
Yeah, but this year Hamilton doesn't have to do any of that. Montreal, by virtue of the fact that the Eastern Division, again, in my opinion, is in flux more than it's been in a while, in a positive sense. It's in flux in a positive way. We don't know how good Ottawa's going to be. We know they can be good. We don't know how good Hamilton's going to be. We know they looked really good at the end of the last year, and it was their defense. If they can improve that, like you said, you're 100% right. And we also know that Montreal's been a pretty damn good team the past couple of years. So, winning a Grey Cup the year before, last year finishing first, so there's the challenge to make the playoffs in the Eastern Division is probably not any tougher than it's been in a while. I keep saying that every year because it's been true. It's been getting more and more difficult to make the playoffs. You can't make the playoffs or finish first with a 6-12 record anymore.
No.
Right? You're going to have to do it with a 12-6 record. The reverse is true.
Do you think we're going to see a team with a really bad record?
Well, the only one we saw last year was Edmonton, and that's something that's bound to change. I really feel it's going to change, and it did, to the point where they weren't the worst team in the league at the end of the year. The team we talked about that has the most to lose and the most change to deal with, the Calgary Stampeders, wore that crown.
Mm-hmm.
So and they'll wear it again this year. I don't think Calgary makes the playoffs. I don't think Calgary makes it out of the basement unless BC continues this trend of self-destruction, which they've found themselves on the past couple of years. And I call it self-destruction because the problems they've had the past couple of years, David, haven't been teams outplaying them.
Mm-hmm.
They just haven't played well. Their offense isn't what we thought it would be. Their defense isn't as reliable as it's been in the past. And for some reason, they've self-destructed. Now, they've gotten rid of a quarterback who, in my opinion, reflects that very trend. Adams is I'm really good or I'm really bad kind of quarterback. And that kind of inconsistency, I think, is something that he needs to get rid of for his own sake, and BC had to get rid of to just get past that inconsistency. And their hope is their young quarterback that was the best quarterback in the Canadian Football League 2 years ago gets back to that form. And if he does, and their BC Lion defense returns as we're more accustomed to seeing them, they'll be competing for first place in the Grey Cup.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Winnipeg too. They eventually figured it out.
Yeah, that is a great organization. I don't think there's been a better organization the last 10, 11 years. I think
I'll give this to Hamilton. What do they decide to do? They went into that organization to find, to go and find players,
and a GM that knows those players.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, that's it too.
He is a real good, he's a good pick for GM. He was ready.
Yeah, I mean, that like that in a lot of ways. When you look at Toronto, I kind of said that was too bad Vince Magri found a different position, because I thought he would have been a nice potential GM of the future for Toronto.
He's been grooming for that position for decades.
Yeah.
He's not that old. I think he went to the Argos after grade school, didn't he? No? Wasn't he 7 or 8 when he started with the Argos? I'm kidding. It's just he's not 40 yet.
He's
close.
He was hired in 2013 as a video coordinator.
Right. He was
promoted him to assistant general manager in 2022, and he left to become a pro scout. So how old was he how old is he now? That's a good question. I don't think they really publicize people's ages that much anymore. I'm trying to think. Because he also did a lot of scouting. He wasn't just the video person.
33.
Let's see. I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so I'm curious.
Well,
I am really curious. But regardless, like I think, the CFL is doing a better job, um, of getting those guys, finding guys within organizations. Look at Alex Russell went to Ottawa, another young up and coming person that did a lot of that stuff.
Okay, now Frank wrote an article about him. He was 33 and 22, so he's 36.
There you go.
That's
young.
On March
4th,
2022. On March 4th, 2022. We're almost there. He says Magri 33.
Mm-hmm.
So another 2 years on top of that makes him 35. Sorry, 3 years makes him 36, like I said. And that's young. And he has a lot of experience.
Mm. Well, he has a lot of Canadian experience. I think part of the reason why it took him a little longer to get the assistant role is because he spent a lot of time as a scout learning the job. But yeah, I mean, but again, that's where I think the CFL needed to go in that direction. Go younger. Find not just finding people that can do the work, but kind of giving a little more cachet to your youth sports people. There was an article the other day, about the Laurier coach,
mm-hmm.
and whether he would ever consider moving into the CFL. I'm going to bring up the article right now just because I know that he had re-signed his deal, so he's there until 2030. But here's I'll read what he had to say. So Wilfrid Laurier head coach Michael Folds likes his job despite interest from the Canadian Football League. The 41-year-old plans to stay in youth sports long term. There's been a couple of CFL teams over the years that have dangled positional coaching positions in front of me, which there is a lack of interest after signing his extension. In coaching ranks in youth sports, there's many guys like Greg Marshalls, Marcel Billafoy in Ottawa, Stefan Pisasic at McMaster having CFL background. There's been lots of coaches have gone back and forth, but not so much for myself. CFL teams like to bring in Americans. It seems there is a lack of new blood in the CFL.
That might have been true. I don't think that's true anymore.
You don't think so?
No, I really don't think it's true anymore. The new blood thing, the Canadian thing's another story. If you don't mind, I'll split both those two. I'll say the new blood in coaching, we've seen a steady stream every year of new guys being brought in that were, coordinators, and now they're being given their first opportunity to be head coaches. Dinwiddie, Mace. Now,
you look at Buck Pierce.
Buck Pierce is the fourth one in the last since Dinwiddie.
Look at Mark Killam.
Mark Killam is the third one since Dinwiddie.
Right. I know. Yeah. Okay. Wolf. We look at Bob Dice. He's been around the block a few times. Okay.
He can be counted as two because he was not a head coach until he was made a head coach. I think it was in Saskatchewan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He became a head coach, and then things didn't work out from there, and now he ends up in Ottawa. He ends up being, I think he was special teams coach, and then so that's five. Can
I also explain one other reason why maybe not as many of these guys are getting jobs in the CFL? Maybe it's because CFL teams don't have the cap to bring them in.
Oh boy. Okay. Do you want to save something for next week?
Sure.
Because we could be on till next week when we touch this topic. This one sets
a tease for next week. Why the CFL management cap still stinks.
Maybe that's part of the reason why younger coaches are being given a better opportunity because they're getting entry-level fee, right? Entry-level contracts as opposed to these guys that are going around the carousel, right? Well, look what we've seen. We've seen a former Grey Cup champ coach. Is there a pedigree more than Campbell? available out there more than Campbell. Dad was a Grey Cup champ. He won a Grey Cup in Ottawa, went to BC, had a pretty good team there. He's now a coordinator.
Yeah.
You know, so there is that. There is the upward mobility of guys advancing to the head coaching ranks, and the carousel isn't guaranteeing a really good CFL coach another coaching job. It's not guaranteeing that anymore. We've seen this happen now for the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
And do I have something against experienced coaches? Absolutely not. Do I like to see new coaches with new ideas? Absolutely, I do. You know, I think the game improves not because coaches are older, but because it's more about, I'm going to use a word, and it's a terrible word to use, but I'm going to use it anyway, because the game gets stale under the same group of men. New minds come in and they bring new wrinkles to the game. They bring a new way to do it, right? And I think that makes the game better, because you never walk away from the old way of doing things, but now you got a new way to do it, and those old ways might retreat to the background, but they can always bring back real quick. We've got a Winnipeg coach who knows all the ins and outs of being a coach and all the rules and that kind of stuff, so it never goes away.
That's true.
Last word on you, buddy.
I'm saving it. I'm gonna save it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. You don't want to get started. He doesn't want to get started.
I'm gonna tell you, once it gets started, I can't finish.
I totally understand, and I respect the fact that you're thinking maybe it's a good idea that you'll just keep your powder dry and be prepared to do this thing I know you're going to do next week. So join us on Monday at 4:00 for the roof being raised because of the coaching cap. And I got to tell you, the thing about the coaching cap is, this is the teaser, is the cap is going up for the players. What we haven't heard, and this is my tease for next week, we haven't heard the coaching cap going up, have we?
Haven't heard. Well, they whether it has or hasn't, they won't tell us. I would say.
Well, if there's a cap, they should tell the fans. But that's just,
we'll figure it out. We'll get someone to tell us a little more about it next week. We're going over, Frank.
Okay, ciao, buddy. Right. He's David Morassutti. I'm Candid Frank Stanishi. Thank you for watching CFL Football Talk. Join us again next week on Monday, and don't forget Candid Frank Stanishi on YouTube. Candid Frank Stanishi 10:30. See you again next time.